My name's Kevin Chu. I'm the Assistant Director of Collections at the Museum of Chinese in America, and I'm talking
Okay.
with Linda Kwok. Today is September 15th, 2020. And
Yes.
so I guess if we can start, can you talk a little bit about your family background since we're a Chinese American museum and it'd be good to have kind of that context?
Sure, sure. Yeah. So my family, I was born in Shanghai um, in the 70s, and we moved here to San Francisco in the late 80s, 1980s. My mother came here in 84. She had a private visiting visa. And then we all came, my mom, my dad, my brother, and I all came in 1988 to San Francisco. So I went to school there. And in 1999, I came to New York to go to graduate school. And we've stayed in New York this whole time, including COVID, and we just moved to the Houston area, Texas. Anything else you'd like to know?
I guess, what did you do prior, or what would you study in school? Kind of how
Oh,
did
sure. Yeah.
that?
So when I came, my mom was actually a pro athlete. She was a professional basketball player. So she came to watch the 1984 Los Angeles Olympics, which was the first time China has participated since it opened up. I studied biology in undergrad. I worked for a children's hospital in Oakland. I helped them translate between, the hospital staff, doctors, and some of the new Chinese immigrants who didn't speak English. After that, I worked for a few years, and then I went to graduate business school in New York. I went to NYU to get my MBA. And after that, I worked in finance for a few years. When September 11th happened, I again volunteered to help translate for some of the low-income Chinese families down in that area so they could get aid to help them. And then we moved to Hoboken, New Jersey, right across the river. So I did a lot of stuff in the community. I left my job full time. I worked for schools. I helped to found a education foundation, and we raised a lot of money for the local urban diverse schools. So that's kind of my life in a nutshell up to this point, pre-COVID.
Okay. Yeah, so it sounds like you've been fundraising and doing kind of community service
Yeah,
type of
a
things for a
lot.
while
Yeah.
now.
I'm still on
And
the board of a nonprofit. We work with disadvantaged children to provide mentors, homework help, enrichment help, just help them, have a better path in life.
yeah, and I guess that kind of answers my next question, but I'll ask it anyway. Kind of what prompted you to organize like the fundraiser for PPE and kind of
Okay. So
that's not like go
I'm
ahead.
very fortunate. Sure, yeah, I'm very fortunate. I speak Cantonese, Mandarin, and Shanghainese are my native language. I also speak Cantonese. So, and with things like WeChat, I'm sure I talk to my friends back home in Shanghai. I visited last year. So I try to understand and keep in contact with all the developments back in China, what people are up to. So I knew a lot when Wuhan happened.
Mhm.
I knew their struggles. My friends in Shanghai weren't as impacted, but they provided a lot of aid, help. Doctors went, they asked me to send PPE from Amazon, and I did as much as I could. And then when COVID first happened, I have a lot of doctors, friends in Hoboken, and they just came to me desperate for help. They said, Linda, patients show up at our door. We are ill prepared. So many of them keep coming, and we don't even have masks to wear. What can you do? Because I'm like the person who can, in the community, know who's who, who to contact, and just, make things happen. So they came to me, I said, oh my God, this is really, really bad. How do we not know? How can we be so ill prepared when this was already happening in China? And, the first case in New Jersey, first case in New York, cases in Seattle, LA, like, how do we not think of this? So then I was like, okay, let me see what I can do. I reached out to friends, all sorts of networks, Facebook groups, WeChat groups, just to friends, like, what can you guys do?
Mhm.
And some offered me to go to the local store and buy up like all the boxes. But even then, China was getting a second wave because a lot of people here or globally were trying to return to China.
Mhm.
So they were quite scared and they were like, okay, we can't buy any from stores. We just don't have any. Um, so then through one of my postings in a local parent group, a friend of mine, Chow, we're friends now. I didn't know her then. She contacted me and she said, I might have a way. So through her, we got in contact with one of her friends in Shanghai who was a businessman. And he knew what factories to go to in Shanghai. And he knew the whole kind of export process. And he was giving us a very good price. I actually had some other friends, like a friend of mine who owns a garment factory in Manhattan.
Mhm.
She knew a lot of people in the manufacturing sector in China. So she was actually doing huge quantities, $1 million pieces, millions of units. And she was talking to Governor Cuomo at the time. So that was my other contact, but we didn't end up using her because our quantity was so much smaller. My contact in Shanghai, he actually supplied the Pope, like in Vatican. So I knew, I figured we had a lot of chats on WeChat about, I don't know you, how am I going to send you money? Like I was trying to figure out the whole process. Like if I send you money and you don't send me anything, I can't find you. But he's a friend of a friend, and I just had a good feeling. And he also supplied the Pope, and he said something to me at the time that I remembered, and I was very touched by it. He said, "We're all Chinese, and therefore we're all family, and that's why I want to help you." I was just really touched. He never made a profit. He just charged us at cost. So then I set up a GoFundMe and I was able to raise $20,000 US. And we were able to get the money to China. Um, so we got 10,000 units of surgical masks and 5,500 units of N95 masks.
Mhm.
And this took us about a month and a half. And let me know how much detail you want me to go into, or I'll break if you have questions. But that process is full of changes in policy, changes in strategy, changes in direction, just to make sure that they actually get here and as fast as we can.
Oh. Yeah, so that whole process you said took a month and a half. Was that raising all the money and actually getting the masks to the US and donating them, or
Yeah.
was that just kind of
Or let me explain.
okay?
The money wasn't the hard part. Once kind of got some momentum going, in Hoboken, the $20,000 wasn't as hard. I had, over 100 donors, and many of them I didn't even know. So our rule was that we were only donating to people who are residents of Hoboken, and they can work at any hospital in the tri-state area, but they had to be affiliated with Hoboken somehow. So we donated to hospitals like Elmhurst, Coney Island, a lot of the public hospitals, and some of them in Queens. Like a lot of the public hospitals actually in New York City, but there was always some Hoboken tie because we just had to limit the scope somehow. Everybody was asking for help, and we donated a lot to Hoboken. City employees. We have a volunteer EMS. The entire group are made up of volunteers and they run the whole ambulance operations. So we donated a lot to them, as and the city firefighters, city employees, police, and we also donated some to the Hoboken schools. And then in terms of the process, it was not easy at all. It was way beyond my comprehension of how difficult it was going to be. I used to work in import-export. I imported, and exported food products to Japan. So I knew there was some kind of regulation, like it's not that easy. And surgical masks were more considered consumer goods versus N95 were definitely medical goods. So at the time, also, N95s were being taken at customs. Like I had various friends who tell me they imported N95s and all of a sudden at the customs, they were withheld by US Customs or FEMA. So we started with surgicals. And they were, so we started with 10,000 surgicals and they came out relatively quickly and more easily. Okay. There was quite a bit of a wait with FedEx. So we had to wait, like, you know, when you place an order with the factory, then they go make it, and then they get it to this port called Wuyi, which was a big manufacturing hub. And they got it to Shanghai port, and then they got it on the plane via FedEx. That probably took like 2 weeks, but just for them to get it on the plane in FedEx. And once FedEx gets here, you know, we were able to package it up. So they went to 15 local hospitals and Hoboken City. And then the N95s were a lot more difficult because if you remember back then, a lot of factories in China started to making it without good quality control. So US complained a lot about, you know, shoddy products. So China really tightened their control over there. And they said, and they gave very few actually licenses to products that are marked as for medical use. So our factory in Shanghai or near Shanghai actually had to relabel all of their masks not for medical use, even though they were made to FDA standards. Absolutely, like before, we did it just to be able to get them out. So it took us a whole extra week for repackaging. And then China actually changed its rules. They put a weight limit on export. They didn't want people to export small packages because every package was going through customs control and inspection, and they just couldn't handle it. So they put a minimum weight on export packages, which caused us to have to, I had enough money to purchase 5,500 units. At the end, we had to purchase 7,200 units. So we put in our own money for that portion, which we sold to friends later. But that was a decision I had to make just overnight. I said, just do it. We've come this far, whatever, like $4,000 or $5,000 of our own money. I said, just do it. And that's how we were able to get the 7,295 masks out of Shanghai. Yeah, I even got my business school friends involved. Someone gave me a NGO nonprofit who would they do, for example, if Haiti had earthquakes, they would go to Haiti and try to get supply to Haiti. So this kind of fell under that umbrella. I was worried about getting them out, like not having to wait, because time was of essence at that point. We were getting into April, middle of April, when so many people were dying, and medical healthcare workers were wearing like garbage bags and stuff.
Yeah.
So I knew time was of essence. So what was my point? So I was just worried about every step to try to get them out. We ended up not using the NGO because they were dealing with large size pellets that we just didn't have enough quantity with the 7,200 N95s. So we ended up using FedEx and UPS to get everything out. That allotment arrived probably, I would say, like early May. This was between end of, late March to early May. And we were able to get them, distribute them to hospitals, city, again, volunteer EMS, and some of them went to the public schools.
Okay. I guess with the donations, how did they go? Did you have to call them first? How did you facilitate all that? Did you know someone that was already ready to receive them? How did you kind of?
Oh, yes, yes, yes. Yes, so I had a spreadsheet. So, during this whole process, through Facebook and a lot of my personal contacts, people came to me. So we vetted them. We made sure they were actual healthcare workers. It doesn't matter whether they're a nurse and we made sure they went to the command centers. I have pictures I can show you. They went to the command centers of these hospitals. And they were distributed from that point on to different areas of the hospital that were in need. So it was mostly, people contacted me, and we vetted them to make sure. And we made sure somebody took the bag and actually handed it to the command centers at these hospitals.
Were there any specifically like memorable donations where they were very, very excited or anything like unpleasant?
Elmhurst, I think Elmhurst, as you know, is in the heart of the Chinese community, Queens and Flushing, and they were one of the hardest hit. Not just Chinese community, but a lot of firefighters and police live near there. It was just a very difficult situation. And we had a physician that worked in Elmhurst. I think they were really, really appreciative. I got letters from Jersey City Medical Center. Hoboken, of course, is another hospital that's not, places like Cornell told me early on they had it. They had enough supply. It was no longer needed. My neighbor works at Morristown, and they also had enough, and it wasn't as needed anymore. So a lot of the masks went to public hospitals in New York, I think, where the needs were greater. They just didn't have as much resources to buy them from elsewhere.
Okay. And I guess you
I
sent
can
us some.
send you pictures if that's helpful. We can discuss later. I have pictures from nurses, doctors. Oh, and then I want to also highlight this. My daughter is in the Girl Scout troop. Typically spring is booth sale season. So we would go to the path and sell like hundreds and hundreds of boxes of Girl Scout cookies. So we were sitting on hundreds and hundreds of boxes of Girl Scout cookies without being able to sell them. So I spoke to our troop leader, and she decided to donate quite a bit to this effort. So we gave everybody a bag of masks and Girl Scout cookies, and that was well received as well. And it was a good, effort on part of the girls, and they each got a badge, and that was quite cute too.
How old is your daughter?
She's 11.
Okay.
They're juniors.
Before you were mentioning that like when the masks came in, FEMA or customs would kind of take them. Were they just like kind of confiscating them for like use for the government, or what was happening?
I don't know what they were using them for. Personally, I've heard like groups on WeChat, people saying they were just gone. Some of them were compensated for the price and the value of the masks, but not for like the customs, duty, like other fees and stuff. And I've even heard, large organizations like, Kaiser Permanente in California lost a huge shipment to FEMA. I don't know where they went. I question that. My friend in New York also said, and you might have seen this in the news, some small company all of a sudden got a huge contract for masks, and they have zero ability to actually manufacture them. My friend is head of a large, garment business. So she has very, very deeply ingrained, like her manufacturers in China make military uniforms. So, she knows, like, it was incredible how they got the contract and not her from the federal government. Yeah.
I definitely read about that. I think it was like,
it was awful. Like, it was really heartbreaking not only was your federal government not helping, they were impeding on your efforts.
Yeah.
Competing, it just getting in your way. Like we literally did things so it doesn't get stolen.
Yeah, they kind of turned the whole thing into like a business thing for profit. Like the whole entire
We're
pandemic
selling
got
it
turned
to
into that.
people or moving them from blue states to red states. Like I don't know. I would love to know. I hope somebody's doing investigations on this
Mhm.
because it was just mind blowing. Like I'm trying to help Americans
Mhm.
and I had to fight my own government. And as much as discrimination, racism was lobbied at China, they were actually helping me. It was just mind boggling. Um, yeah.
I guess speaking kind of to that racism, I was kind of going to ask you about that. Like, you've heard about a lot of like the
Oh,
anti-Chinese or anti-Asian sentiment, and
yeah.
like and especially in New York, there's been a lot of like racially motivated attacks, and they're kind
I
of just
know.
like saying it's just a normal attack. But like, have you experienced any kind of like of that racism
I
at all?
mean, nobody like physically attacked me, but I've been here 30 plus years. You know, I always felt as long as I do a good job, you know, I was a good student, I was a good worker. Um, I've never felt so discriminated against or treated as an outsider or the enemy until COVID. Like just from small things like friends, you know, posting on Facebook saying, can Chinese people please just stop eating animals or eating bat soup? I'm like, no, that's just part of their culture. Like we don't eat dead chicken that's been sitting in bleach at the supermarket for who knows how long, right? Like wet markets, it's such a derogatory term, but that's just their culture. That's how they eat. It's farmer market. It's no different than Union Square farmer market, but that sounds so much nicer. Like little things like that. I'm like, don't try to judge my culture from yours. Like it's not dirty. It's not whatever. It just fresh. You know, things like that that really bothered me. Then everybody calling it a Chinese virus, how, you know, China needs to pay for it. I'm like, listen, like they're airplanes. Before anybody knew, before China knew what it was on airplanes on its way to France, Italy, everywhere. Like there was nothing anybody could have done. If anything, I think China, by so swiftly locking down Wuhan, probably bought everybody time. But we wasted all that time. We did nothing in February.
Yeah. It's kind of like, yeah, and I think it was like a study done that like a lot of the cases in the US kind of came from Europe and not
Yeah,
China, but it was still
yeah,
kind of just like it's still even now it's still being perpetuated. It's like Chinese are the enemy, and like even kind of like you talked about the labeling of like wet markets. They're kind of everywhere. Like they're basically open air markets. And
right. Yeah, that's
they're
how.
kind of everywhere, and they're just like wet markets, and they show these like videos of like raw animals being cut up, and it's not generally the case. It's kind of like a weird like I guess a stereotyping.
I mean, but then when you look at our farm complex, right? Like how poorly chickens and cows are treated, how we're not allowed to video those things.
Mhm.
It's just capitalism. It's just a factory complex. Whereas in China, it was one of the first things they did. And I remember them doing it. I didn't leave until 1988. I remember one of the first things that changed China. You used to have these ration tickets. You could buy 4 ounces of meat every month per person.
Mhm.
They just couldn't grow enough, couldn't raise enough. There was no system, no distribution. One of the first things China did was it allowed farmers to sell their products in the cities.
Mhm.
And, you know, and then all of a sudden, city people were able to buy a live chicken at the market that wasn't even available before. So I think it was one of the first things it did to lift up the economy, you know, lift people out of poverty and provide fresh food really at a reasonable cost. There wasn't so many middlemen like in the US. So it's just how it works there. It works for them. It's nothing, you know, I think we're all at fault for encroaching on animal
Mhm.
territory. Um, I mean, H1N1 started in the US. we were just lucky it didn't get as bad as COVID, or the virus is not as virulent.
Mhm.
We were just lucky, really.
Yeah.
And we don't even talk about or, know about it.
Mhm. I want to go back really quick. You mentioned a lot about how like you've never really felt kind of discriminated against until now, and you're raising children in this kind of
Yeah.
environment. How is that, and how have you kind of like talked to them about what's going on? Have you broached the subject at all?
I mean, it's very, very hard to I think today's children are raised much more aware.
Mhm.
They talk about diversity at school, they talk about the rainbows of the color, diversity in terms of ethnic background or ability. It's much, much better today than we were when we were little kids. Like when I was in college in the 90s, we were very racist. Have you watched the first Mulan, the
Yeah,
cartoon,
yeah.
and
I
see
actually
how
just
racist
rewatched that
that is?
recently.
It's so, I couldn't even watch it. It's disgusting. But back then, that was just normal. I think my kids just aren't, their Chinese isn't that great. I feel sad that culture is being lost. I'm very lucky. I read Chinese, I speak Chinese, so I'm kind of both. Whereas I see it, my kids feel they're Americans. They love steak. They're not as Chinese, if there's such a thing. But I have to say, I've never felt so proud to be Chinese. I've been here 31, 2 years. I always just try to fit in, try to lay low. Like I don't talk about, yeah, we eat live chicken or chicken feet or anything like that with my American friends. They just think it's weird and I don't like blast it.
Mhm.
But I've, especially looking at what China has done in the last 30 years since I left and how much development, how well people live and how they controlled COVID, they're out partying. Shanghai is having a huge tourism festival right now. They're all out in the streets having a great time, and look at us.
Yeah, I know.
Um, I've never felt so discriminated against. I also have never felt so proud to be a Chinese American. I think it's both.
Mhm. Yeah. I guess just to go back a little further, sorry, because
Yeah,
I'm just
no,
kind of jumping
please.
around based on where the conversation's going. With the fundraiser, how did you end up getting the word out about it? And how did you get, because you got a lot of donations, how did you kind of promote it or?
GoFundMe, GoFundMe, and changes, and Facebook, and I gave updates. I gave updates every step along the way.
Mhm.
Some days I was just like, so once kind of the snowball started getting rolling,
Mhm.
um, I raised a lot. I gave updates. There were some days, I'm not gonna lie, I'm like, is this ever going to happen? Am I just gonna be the shame of the town for having failed at this? I mean, I thought long and hard about it. I didn't start fundraising until I was quite sure that this was gonna work. And otherwise I was just gonna spend my own money. Like I spent my own money before I started even fundraising. I spent like $4,000 or $5,000 on the surgical masks before I even started fundraising, because I was ready for it to fail and it would just be my own loss. um, so I did things as I was getting more and more sure that I could actually have something to show for that money.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I guess a last question, like kind of how is your family in China kind of, or your friends kind of, how do
My
they see the situation
friends,
in like in like the US? Because I know like their situation's a lot better than ours, and I know I have like family, my wife has family in China that's like worried about her all the time, and they keep asking
oh yeah,
like how has your family kind of reacted to, like not in the US, reacted to what's going on? What have they said to you about kind of the US handling?
I think their view of the US has completely changed. Last year, I went back to China for the first time in 10 years since my children were born. It was their first time there. And what I saw was absolutely mind blowing how advanced they are technologically, how clean China is, even if you go to the big cities, and how good their infrastructures are between subways, high-speed trains, highways, cars, Ubers, everything. It just runs so smoothly. I was like, wow, this makes New York look like a dump. I mean, look at our subway. It's just a mess. Um, so and a lot of my friends, several of them still, you know, they felt it was a good thing. Like they sent their kids to private schools, high schools in the US and colleges in the US. And some of them are, you know, one of them was a freshman at Case Western. The other one just got into UC Santa Barbara. You know, they're pulling them back. Their plans have changed. Why would they pay all that money to live through such discrimination? You know, and I think a lot of those perceptions are changing. And I keep telling them, we're just very different. You know, and the speed at which China changed, I think, is astonishing and something to be proud of for anyone. And, you know, they honestly, they don't really care about the US. They don't care to start a war or a fight. They're happy there. They're not imposing socialism or communism on anybody. They're not trying to take over the world. Believe me, and I know thousands of years of history, they've never had that ambition. They don't want to, and they never will. But US continues to be hostile, picking up on things like Xinjiang and now Mongolia, and just our current regime. I think what's painful to me is it's only shooting ourselves in the foot. Economically, we can't make an iPhone here. You know, all that like banning TikTok and WeChat, it's stupid. There's nothing, they're not evil, they're not trying to steal, they're not spying. Who's spying? And what they're doing to Chinese students, it's going to hurt our research because Chinese students contributed a lot to our research, medical, finance, computers. I mean, I'm concerned about losing that talent pool. I just wish we were friendlier. I wish more Americans actually understood China and socialism better to say that we can coexist. Because I firmly believe that. And I think only through a friendly coexistence can we all do better. We spend so much money on defense and wars and fights. It's just, I feel sad, honestly, for Americans, because look at what China did. It took care of its people in infrastructure, education, job creation, and the people's lives are so much better. That's how I feel.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of that sentiment. Yeah, like definitely socialism is just like a bad word. It just has a bad association.
It's a bad word.
And I don't think a lot of people actually understand what the system is or the pros.
And anything we do here that sounds socialist, like universal health care. I mean, look at COVID. Look at the impact on people. Look at how many people are not getting care because they don't have insurance. Look at how many people lost jobs and therefore they don't have insurance and they're not getting care and dying at home. And look at the bills that are coming. I'm starting to read articles about the bills that are coming. That's going to crush another wave of people. And the inequalities inherent in these systems, how people of color are getting impacted. I mean, you look at Chinatown, the restaurant workers don't have insurance. You know, how are they getting care? Like, I don't know. I think about these things. And so universal health care is not a bad thing. It's not. Yes, it's socialist, but we absolutely need it. I think it exposed a lot of these inequalities. And like without the stimulus money, without the $600, people can't even live. Like, how can it be? Like, I think that's another thing. My friends in China are just shocked to see how long the food lines are, how poor people are, how fed up people are, how people are protesting. They were shocked. Like, how can that be? US, the supposed richest nation in the world. I think people globally are shocked at some of the underbellies of the US that has been exposed through this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
Just sad. I mean, I'm really happy I was able to help mm-hmm. with the little bit I could do. And, honestly, it's very, very interesting because as I was growing up in China, there's a lot of propaganda. I'm not going to lie about it. Mm-hmm. People are encouraged to be patriotic. We get together and fight the fight. And I think it also manifests in China, where everybody just wore a mask. Everybody bought into the cause. Everybody acted voluntarily for the cause, wherever the help was needed. They asked for medical workers from Shanghai, like within half a day, 500 spots filled from my old district in the hospital I even knew. And they went, young people they only take kids born in the 90s. They want young, healthy people, and they all went without an extra penny of compensation. And that's what I did in the US. I wanted to help my country. That was being patriotic to me. And then I see on TV, the patriots were against masks. It's mind-blowing. They think they're being patriotic by being free. But what does free mean to you and to me? There's no free without responsibility.
Yeah.
I think our definition of freedom is very just selfish. It's selfishness to me. Free to you, but not to me.
But yeah, we were talking about kind of like, I guess, the whole thing of like this notion of freedom and like how not wearing a mask is like freedom, but like it's a weird kind of logical jump. I think I've always seen it as that, like they're like, oh, it's my right to not wear a mask, but then like, what is it? It's your right to take things if you don't want to pay, right? I guess where do you draw the line in terms of like what's my right? Like it's
right, like I think at one point I heard this Buddhist teacher saying, right, like if you look at like the US and the West and Christianity, it's a very polar thing. It's a very polar, it's like a stick, and there are two directions. There's heaven and earth, there's heaven and hell, there's winning and losing, good and bad. If you're not good, you're bad. If you're not with me, you're against me. And that's kind of how they think, how we in the West think. Whereas in China, you look, everything is as a circle. There's the yin and the yang. And in the most part of the white, there's black. In most of the black, there's a white. Everything is about a balance, right? So we all are interconnected. We all live in one world. And a little thing, a little flutter of butterfly's wing in China, a little virus that jumped to a person and mutated and then jumped from person to person is causing all this impact here. So we're all interrelated. There's only us, there's only people. It doesn't matter whether you're American or Chinese. Like, what am I? Am I American? Am I Chinese? I'm both. Right? Like, I think, freedom comes with responsibility. Look at them. They're free. They're free to go out, have dinner, do whatever they want. Like the notion of like making sacrifices, is that a Chinese thing? I think they're just, they're used to it. They welcome it more. You have to make some sacrifices if you want, Americans, right? Like we're instant gratification. I have to be happy, free all the time. There's no such thing. Yeah.
Yeah. I think like you mentioned it before, like you always
what's another thing? really our lack of critical thinking and education.
Mhm.
People are screaming, the masks are going to kill me, the carbon monoxide are going to kill me. I'm like, no, it's not carbon monoxide, it's called carbon dioxide, and it doesn't kill you. Like, I think that's what my friends in China it's another thing that's very shocking to them, just the basic level of education.
Mhm. Yeah, I think like it kind of is like that a whole thing where like this freedom of information, as I like to say in like America, but like it's freedom to like spread misinformation as well. There's no
Right,
regulation. I think that's kind of like a double-edged sword, I guess.
right.
I'm not
Yeah,
saying
freedom
like,
of speech.
yeah,
Freedom
I'm
of speech is not a good, I mean, I wouldn't say it's not the critical thinking skills, right? I think as as you have more and more platforms like Facebook, Twitter, everybody can say something.
Mhm.
Critical thinking skills are so much more important, and some of it comes from education. Here's another funny side story. I actually went to Zhong Nanshan's house, the Fauci of China. I went to his house as a teenager. His wife and my mom played basketball together. They
Mhm.
were good friends. So I visited him in Guangzhou when I was like young. And just that experience, and he is the hero there. I mean, he's so revered and respected, and whatever he says, everybody listens. He just received like the highest civilian medal of honor,
Mhm.
and Dr. Fauci is getting death threats. It's just the difference is kind of just makes you really think, like, what kind of people are we?
Yeah, it's weird. Yeah, like it's not saying that like information should be restrictive, but also like they keep touting freedom of speech, but I don't think a lot of people know what it means. It means like freedom from being like saying what you want, not being persecuted by the government, but not like being canceled as they say now. Like they're like you can't cancel
Well,
me. It's
that's the
freedom of
thing,
speech, and
right?
it's
I
like a
mean,
weird.
no, I've heard so many people being canceled. The editor of like some newspaper in Philadelphia Inquirer, he said buildings matter too, and he got forced out. Like, the professor. I'm sure you've heard the story. The professor in USC, who was in the linguistics class, and he said the filler word in Chinese is 那个,
Mhm.
那个. It's just like a
Mhm.
filler word. It means that,
Mhm.
or it just means um,
Mhm.
and and he got fired. He got suspended.
I
Students
didn't
complained
see
that it
that at
sounds like
all.
the N word,
Yeah,
which,
yeah.
but how disrespectful is that to Chinese people?
Mhm.
It's completely irrelevant. They're different languages. You can't compare things like that.
Mhm.
The whole cancel culture and and how fervent some of these young people are. I mean, my parents lived through the Cultural Revolution,
Mhm.
and that was not fun. It was awful. It makes me think of the Red Guards, which is not a good thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess during the whole interview, you were kind of saying like you're American, and it's kind of like that's kind of something really hard to reconcile, especially like now. I guess for me too. Like
I've never
I've
had
always,
it's an identity crisis. What
yeah,
am I? What are you?
it's like you always feel like you're American. You never feel like you do feel like kind of like people do see you for like your Asian face, but also you're like American. You never felt like you're not American. Like now, it really feels like they all see you as other, and like no matter what, your appearance is the main
Yeah.
distinguishing factor of
Yeah.
you,
I, I
and it's
I'll tell you, I've never been so proud to be Chinese American. And did you watch the PBS show on Asian Americans?
I haven't had a chance
Oh
yet.
my God, it's so incredibly good and truthful. And I watched shows like 13 as well, which talks about the whole African American experience, slavery. And I highly, highly recommend that, especially as a museum. I think you should do a screening or something. Um, we built America. Asians built the Transatlantic Railroad, Trans-Pacific Railroad. We built a lot of buildings west of Rockies. I mean, I grew up in San Francisco. I lived in San Francisco for many years. Asians came and built this country. America is every bit European as it is Chinese, Asian. And that's what America is. I think this white supremacism is new. You know, that's a new thing. Like, I don't even remember it being as strong and prevalent as when I first came in the 1980s. I always felt Asians kind of had a say in San Francisco. You know, like, you're looking at me as other, but I am no more other than you. We're all other because we're not Native American.
Yeah.
You know? But we're no different. No, we all just ended up here for one reason or another. And I tell my friends, honestly, if my decision was today, I wouldn't come here.
Mm-hmm.
Like, my parents made a decision. I think it was a good decision then, knowing what they knew. If I were Chinese, I wouldn't leave China today. And I'm sure your ancestors made a decision to leave at a certain point in time, and that was a good decision. But now, I wouldn't leave.
Yeah, it's kind of yeah. I don't really know what like the whole thing's kind of like the whole white supremacy. I think it's always been like kind of rooted in American like history, like that
Yeah.
whole kind of thinking. But I think it's more prevalent now because of all the outlets, like you said, like Facebook and Twitter. It's easier for them to kind of congregate, and especially with the
What's
administration.
another thing I'm thinking about? White people are hurting. Look, when you look at the manufacturing sector, right?
Mm-hmm.
What transformed the manufacturing sector in China? A friend of mine was one of the first Chinese American businessmen to open a factory in southern China. They make weight exercise equipment and like inner tubes. 1995, one of the first to open a factory in Guangdong province. So much of our manufacturing has been shifted over there, right? So you got towns in Ohio, Michigan decimated without jobs. And like, what are we doing, America, from the government level, federal government level, to do something about it? I think China made a very conscious effort to alleviate poverty, to create jobs, create trade, the whole bridge and road initiative. It's about trading. Chinese love to trade. So they are building up these nations in Africa through that, but it's also providing jobs for Chinese people. I mean, like, what are we doing, Americans? I think I really feel bad for some of these uneducated, like, you know, not a college degree, older white people who just have no way of make a good living. But instead of asking our government for more accountability, a domestic economic, you know, renaissance policy, we spend 50%. I can send you. We spend 50% of our discretionary budget on defense, dropping bombs everywhere. Starting, I can tell you, I can talk about Xinjiang for like 2 hours too, but that has something to do with American policies in the Middle East. You know, I just think Americans should demand better, ask better. It's sad, really.
Yeah, I
And
think
they think that's socialism. Oh my God, it's so bad. It's so funny. When I talk to my friends in China, I know this woman in Chengdu, Sichuan province. We just met randomly in Shanghai. And she's like, I told her about COVID and all that. She's like, what's your government doing to help you? I said, nothing. And that's unfathomable to them because their government would be on it from every level, local, province, federal, central government. The government will be helping them. And I think we need to ask for more of that.
Yeah, definitely. I think, yeah, that's the whole thing. Like, even with defense budget, like, it's all on military, like physical defense. But we've seen with the pandemic, it's like could get
Right.
destroyed by not something physical, not a physical threat, and the money's
Right.
being spent on the wrong kind of
And the
defense.
new threat is digital threat. Look at the article on Facebook. Facebook is war, basically. Wars are being fought on Facebook. And like, we don't regulate that. You know, the new enemy is things like virus, digitally, on the internet. We're not doing nearly enough. We're fighting the wrong thing. It made me personally very concerned about our position and positioning ourselves well for the new era,
Mhm.
2020 onwards. Things like we don't have 5G because we're fighting so hard with China and try to control, contain, and eliminate Huawei and 5G.
Mhm.
What's going to happen is we're going to end up not having 5G when the rest of the world has moved on.
Yeah.
Economically, that kind of impact on American lives is huge.
Yeah.
What are we doing about that?
Yeah, I mean it's like the bullet train. Like I think they were in negotiations with the Chinese company to do a bullet train, but then they pulled out because it was a Chinese company or something. And like the U.S. has no high-speed train network at all, and it's kind of
It's
crazy.
so sad. We went from Shanghai to Hangzhou, 100 miles, less than an hour. And I
Yeah.
even bought second class tickets because I didn't want my kids to be spoiled. Beautiful, nice, clean. I mean, that created so many jobs and so much just economic opportunity for China. And that's in the last 5 to 10 years.
Mhm.
US, we have nothing.
Yeah, it's kind of.
Nothing. A crumbling highway system. Crumbling.
Yeah.
Because we're not spending money on it.
Yeah, and New York has like a over 100-year-old like subway system that's barely running, and
Right?
and let's look at like the subway systems in like China and stuff that were like they were made in what the 70s or 80s.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
There's
they're
17. I'll send you an article I wrote. There's 17 subway lines now in Shanghai. Honestly, I spent 10 days in Shanghai, 25 million people.
Mhm.
I was stuck in traffic maybe 10 minutes.
Mhm.
That's between subway, Uber, all kinds of ride hail systems, taxis, 10 minutes.
Mhm.
It's so incredibly efficient. And when I went before, there was like people driving, not following traffic rules and like accidents everywhere. I can't even cross the street. This time, everybody follows rules. You know why? Government surveillance. There are
Mhm.
cameras everywhere. But people follow rules because they know they're being watched. So like it makes you think, like, is it really that bad?
Mhm.
Or is it kind of good?
Yeah, I think it's some level, some more like regulations for certain things make more sense just because,
I
like,
know. So
I
my
don't know.
point is, Big Brother is not all bad.
Yeah, that's like the
Well,
whole idea of
yeah,
everything.
yeah.
Like, surveillance is bad, socialism is bad, but we still have Social Security, which is not bad, and Medicaid, which is not bad, but it is socialism. Like, it's
I
a lot
know.
of weird, like, I guess, ingrained kind of ideas
Yeah.
in America that
Yeah,
kind
but there are advancements in technology though, like the whole thing about facial recognition and AI. I mean, they are just like we say they're spying. Why would they be spying if their technology is better than ours? Like they're not spying us on 5G. We don't have 5G,
yeah.
And like Americans have to stop thinking we're number one in the world because we are not. And like unless you recognize that, you can't catch up or you can't develop. I think a lot of Americans sit on that laurel of we're number one, we're the best, our way is the only way, but we are falling behind. We keep falling behind if we don't recognize that.
Mhm.
And soon, China will just be like, decouple all you want. We're fine without you. I think it's only hurting American people.